So I am a collector of wood scraps. I enjoy making wood signs with vinyl as a stencil, and so everywhere I go, any piece of wood that I find interesting, I keep it and I save it, and I have piles of it all over my craft room and my garage. I have everything from old pallet wood to driftwood I found on the beach, to this is a piece of beach fencing that was broken, and even just using just regular scraps of wood that we've used for projects around the house, and even pre-made stuff that you can find at different craft stores. I love making these signs, and so this tutorial I'm going to be making a sign. I'm actually going to use this piece of wood here, and I'm just going to make a little welcome guest, kind of here's our Wi-Fi guest password kind of sign, using stencil vinyl and chalk paint on this particular piece of wood. An example of what it would look like: here's a piece of beach fencing that I have done before, and I just used the vinyl as a stencil and some chalk paint. It's really easy and simple, and I think they look great just hanging out anywhere in your house. So let's get started. Okay, so we're going to get started with what we're going to need to be able to make a wooden sign using vinyl as a stencil. So the first thing we need is our wooden board, and then we need a paintbrush. I'm just going to use this foam brush just to put a base coat on my board. We need some water and chalk paint. I use this Waverly brand chalk paint. So we need, the way that I'm going to do it is I make it more like a stain. So I use water and the chalk paint, and I just kind of wipe it with paper towels, or you can use baby wipes also. We need the Cricut scraper or some sort of a squeegee tool, and then we need a weeding tool, and we need some, this is actual stencil vinyl that Cricut puts out. You can use regular vinyl. I've used the indoor vinyl as a stencil before, and that has worked. You don't want probably to use the permanent vinyl because the adhesive on it might be too much, and it could pull up the paint that you're going to put down. So I wouldn't. My personal preference is to not use that. If I didn't have stencil vinyl, then I would use the indoor vinyl or the removable vinyl because it has less of a tack on it, but it still has enough tack that it's going to stay down, and hopefully you won't get any bleeding when you do your painting. So for right now, I'm going to go ahead and get started with painting the board, and then we'll go from there. Okay, so I've added a little bit of water to my paint because chalk paint tends to be really, really thick, and I'm just going to get a paper towel ready because I'm just going to put a little bit of paint on, and then I'm going to wipe it with the paper towel and water to give it more of a stained look rather than a painted look. If you want it painted, that's totally fine. You could just paint it, let the paint dry really well before you do your stenciling to make sure that you don't pull up any of the paint when you pull your stencil off. So I've prepped my board. It's sanded really nicely. It's very smooth. The smoother you can get the board, the better. So it's really good to use a fine grit sandpaper as your last sanding. And to go ahead and get started, I'm just going to take the paintbrush and just paint a little bit of it on. And I just chose this green color to add a little pop of color. And this chalk paint really does go a long way. it's very thick and it covers really well. And when I thin it down, it dries really quickly as well. So that's what I like about it, because I've done classes before where they're painting or staining their boards in the class, and they've got to put their stencil on, paint it, and you know, finish the project all in one night. So it's nice that this actually dries really fast. So I've dipped my paper towel in some water, and then I'm just going to wipe it until I get, you know, a consistency that I like. So again, I'm just trying to, I'm going to move this out of the way. I'm trying to have it more like a stain than a paint. So I'm just wiping it with the grain, and until I get, I mean, the more I wipe, the more comes off. So it's not, so I just keep wiping like this until I get, you know, something that I'm satisfied with. I usually like to see some of the wood grain in here, but if I decided that I wanted it a little darker, I could certainly wipe off less, or I can always put more on if I wipe too much off. And so I'm just going to take a look at this. I'm going to finish this board up just like this, and then we'll go on to our next step. Space, and I have decided that I wanted to make a sign with our guest Wi-Fi for our house to be posted so people could see it, and that way we don't have to keep answering what's your Wi-Fi. So what I have done here is I put in a rectangle that's the same size as the piece of wood that I have, and then I built my stencil on top of that, basically. So I know exactly what I'm working with as far as the size goes. So I've got it all set here, and what I did was I selected all the different components of my sign and I attached them to this rectangle. So you can see here it's attached because I can only detach it. The other thing that we decided to do, instead of actually putting, we have a guest Wi-Fi, and instead of putting the password and our SSID, we decided to put we made a QR code that will basically take a person right to join our Wi-Fi network. They don't have to even ask a password. They'll just scan it with their phone, and or their tablet or whatever they're trying to connect with, and it will connect them right to it, which is kind of cool. So I did this at a website called qrmonkey.com, and I just put in our Wi-Fi info, and it made this QR code, which I saved as a PNG file. So this part of it will be print and cut, and I'll probably just do it on the printable vinyl, and it'll be placed on top of the sign like a sticker. So I'll put it, it's going to go right here. Let me send it to the front. There we go. So this is just my stencil, but this big gray rectangle represents my block that I'm using, my piece of wood, and then I'm going to pull out these letters and I'm going to paint with white paint, and you'll see that coming up. But and then when I'm done, I'm just going to have this print and cut sticker that I'm going to put on top that they'll be able to scan with their phone. So from here, I'm just going to go to make it, and then it's going to give me two things here. I've got to, this one's going to be a print and cut. Turn it on my machine here. And this one here is going to be cut out of the stencil vinyl. So because I'm stenciling it, I don't need to, it's like regular vinyl, I do not need to mirror anything. So this piece here should be all set. And then I will do the print and cut for this one here. I'm going to start with cutting this one first though. So if I click on this one and then I say continue, and once I get connected to my device, it'll ask me to set my base material. I'm starting with this one here, so I'm going to start with the stencil vinyl. So that's what I'm going to choose first for my material choice. And to do that, I just have to go into, I might actually have it, I do a lot of, I don't see it in my favorites, but so I just browse all materials, and then I can select vinyl and go through and find the stencil vinyl, or which it's right down here, or I could even just type it in the search bar up there and it would still do it. So I've got stencil vinyl chosen. It's just going to use my fine point blade, and I'm going to go ahead and cut that out, and then after that I'll go and do the print and cut. I've got my vinyl on my mat. My mat is a little used, so I am using a brayer to just get the vinyl down well, plus it was wound pretty tight on the roll. So if I use a brayer, that just makes sure that since my mats are older, I'm getting good stick. So then I just load it in underneath the feet here. And I actually have the wrong blade in here because I was cutting something different. So let me make sure my blade is clean and put the proper blade in there. And we'll go ahead and hit the go button. Okay, so we're going to unload here. Take our vinyl off the mat. See what that looks like. Looks pretty good. And then the next thing that I am going to do is I am going to use some of this printable vinyl, and I'm going to send it through my printer to print up the QR code so that I can add it at the end when I'm all done painting the sign. Okay, so I printed it up on my printer. This black mark around it is the registration box, and that is what the Cricut is looking for, so it knows where to cut. This one's a basic square, so it's pretty straightforward. I did use a scrap piece of the vinyl, so I tricked my printer into printing on it properly. But anyways, so the next thing that we need to do here is send it through the machine and let it cut. So the first thing that you'll notice is a light's going to come on in there, and it's going to scan the black lines. So you can see that there's a light on in there, and it's scanning the black line all the way around the cut. This is how it knows exactly where to cut the square. We'll unload that. Thankfully that didn't mess anything up, and now I've got a perfect square cut around, and I'll just pull that sticker off and place it on my sign when I'm all done. Okay, so now I have everything cut and I need to start weeding my vinyl. So the first thing is I'm going to take off this little edge here, just using a weeding tool. Take off the border so that it's going to just come all the way around the rectangle that I made, and just throw any of that excess away. And then what I need to do, being careful, is I have to go in, and it's like reverse weeding in a way. You have to take out the parts where we want the paint to go and leave the parts where we don't want to paint. So we basically take out the letters like this. So this stuff weeds pretty nice. Just poked a hole in there. So we're leaving all the centers of the letters, and we are taking out what we would normally keep if we were doing regular vinyl. And so I'm just going to go through this whole thing and weed out all the parts that are going to leave me with my stencil. So a friend of mine who used to be in the sign business had given me a bunch of this transfer tape. It's a paper type of tape. And so since I have so much of it, that's what I'm actually going to use to transfer this stencil onto my sign. So here you can see it's all weeded out. All the little letters are weeded. It takes some patience for some of these smaller little things, but it certainly can be done. So the way that I do it when I'm working with something large is I roll the tape out, and then I'll set this on top of it, and then flatten it from there. So I'm just going to set this down and roll it out like so. And then I will just use my knife tool to cut the transfer tape, or scissors, but this is pretty handy. And then I'll flip it over and lay it down. And then this is where the scraper tool or a squeegee comes in handy, because you want to make sure that you're getting the paper to stick to your stencil, so you can pull your stencil off the backing. So some air bubbles are in here, and the thing that you want to make sure is that you don't want the air bubbles to be around your letters. But like if it's up in here, it's not going to matter. This is coming off anyway. When we lay our stencil down, it's important that we don't have air bubbles around the words that we're trying to actually stencil. So here we just want to make sure that we're getting all these little pieces stuck down by just rubbing over this. And any area where there's little pieces, you just really want to make sure you scrape that down pretty good and try to get this as best you can. And what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to use, this is a self-healing mat, and I'm just going to cut off any excess here. All right, so we've got it covered in the transfer tape, and I've got our board is all dry. I've done a little bit of sanding to give it just kind of some rough edges and rough look on it. And you can see there's kind of this side, you can still see some of the wood grain through it. The other side a little bit more so. This one tends to me to look more like a stain than the other one does. But this board was bent like this, so I'm going to go with this side just based on the bend. It was just a scrap piece that we had, but it still looks great. And I just kind of roughed up the edges a little bit to give it a little distressed look. And so we're ready to peel off the backing of our stencil here. So we just find a corner, and you just want to pull back slowly. I find pulling it at an angle like this is helpful. And what we want to make sure is that when we get to some of these smaller letters, that we definitely make sure we have those little inside pieces still attached We don't want anything left on this backing as we pull it off. So we just pull it slowly, making sure that everything stays where it should. And there we go. And now it's just a matter of placing the stencil on here. So I know I have a good straight edge because I made that rectangle, and I made this, it'll be probably just a smidge smaller than this board. So what I like to do is just try to align the top edge and see if I can get that down there pretty good. And then once you have that top edge where you want it, then that's when this tool comes in handy, or maybe the scraper if you're gentle with it. But you just want to take it and kind of push this way. And that is making the vinyl adhere to the wood. And we just do this in a nice even, like I said, this air bubble is just in this transfer tape and it's not near any letters. It's going to come out when we put it on, take off the transfer tape anyway. So we just do this slowly until we get the whole thing stuck down. Like so. And then what we need to do is peel back the transfer tape, leaving the vinyl on the wood. And again, I find it helpful to peel back at this angle. And doing the same thing, just slowly peeling, especially once we get to those smaller letters. And we just want to make sure that all the inside pieces stay where they're supposed to. See, like those right there. And you just pull at this angle where you're pulling it almost flat. Okay, so apparently my phone died while I was recording that, so clearly you've missed a step here. I stopped though. So basically I just finished putting this on, peeling off that transfer tape, and then you know, I've got my chalk paint here, and it's not watered down, it's just straight chalk paint. And then I use either one of these sponge brushes, or I use makeup sponges like this. And the idea here is that less is more. So I dip it in and I get some paint on there, but that's a lot of paint. So I'll have a paper towel or something and I just kind of dab off a little bit so I don't have as much on there. And then I'll even sometimes just start away from the letters to make sure I get some of that paint off. The idea is to dab up and down. We're not wiping, we're not swiping, we're just pushing up and down, trying to cover all the areas where the letters are. And again, because this is chalk paint, it has really good coverage. You're probably going to get tired of hearing me say that, but it does have really good coverage, and it also dries really quick, which is why I like to use it. So that is how you would do it with the makeup sponge, and this would same kind of concept with the sponge brush. Just again, we're not wiping or swiping, we are literally just dabbing up and down like this, and just making sure we get in all those crevices, all the areas. And you know, if we need to go back over it, we always can. So it's just I don't know, some people prefer the makeup brushes, some people prefer the sponge. I'm kind of torn at this point. I think sometimes I feel like the sponge gives the the makeup sponge gives a better coverage, and then sometimes I feel like this does. I haven't decided yet on a preference. Sometimes this leaves kind of a little bit of a texture, and so then I'll go back over it with the makeup sponge, and I think it just kind of flattens it out a little bit, and it picks up, sometimes I think it picks up any excess paint that you might have in there. I just try to make sure I'm looking at all the edges and all the little nooks and crannies and making sure we've got those covered. And then once I do, that's when I feel I'm ready to start peeling. And so I think I'm at that point. So we'll go ahead and start peeling this stencil off. I'll start up here at the top, and I just grab it. If at all possible, I want to go, if I can, with the grain of wood. This was a, purchased piece of wood, so it was kind of sanded and prepped really well. But if you're using like a piece of old pallet wood where you don't want to sand too much because you like the rustic look of it, sometimes you can pull off some of it almost like splinters as you're pulling it off. So we just start pulling, and here's the big reveal. So this stuff is meant to tear, so just like it did right there, that's kind of what you want it to do. But you can see so far, it looks like we've got nice crisp letters. And as you're pulling this, if you feel that you need to cut it, so you're not pulling too big of a piece, you can certainly do that. And then again, like I said, if it tears like that, that's totally fine. But I try to always pull in the direction of the grain of the wood, because I don't know if you can see it, but there's little tiny bits that are, kind of coming up, which is okay. Which is also why I like to kind of have a distressed look, because then if you do, and that's such a minor imperfection, but if you do, it looks like it was intentional, and I think that's kind of cool. So, we just pull, and then if I get to a point where I don't want to pull too much, I'll just snip it. And then we just go in with a weeding tool, pull that up. And then we just have to go in, and we have to very gently with a weeding tool, especially with this paint is still wet, but we have to go in and try to get up underneath that vinyl. We don't want to poke the wood, because you can actually poke a hole in it. But we have to pull out all these little pieces so that we can show how well that did there. So you just have to be careful, like I said, not to poke too deeply, because it will poke into the wood and you'll have little like marks there. Okay, so here it is, completely finished. I've pulled out all the vinyl. You can see we did get some really nice, good, crisp edges. I will say I've never really done signs with such small lettering on it, but I'm happy with the way it came out. It looks really good. So the only thing for me left to do is I have this QR code, and I just printed this on printable vinyl, and did a print and cut with it, so it's already cut, and I just have to peel this off, and it's just like a little sticker now. And so if I take this, and I'm just gonna place it right below this Scan Me. So then I just put that on there. And now when anybody comes over, all they have to do is take their phone and scan that. This will be setting up on a place where they can see it, and I don't have to give them my password anymore. It's a guest password, so be our guest. Scan away. I hope you learned something from this. I will leave you with a few pictures of some other wood signs that I've made, and I just, it's one of my favorite things to do. If I could decorate every wall in my house, I think that's what I would do with it, but I guess I have to stop somewhere. So I hope you enjoyed this tutorial. If you have any questions, feel free to ask, and I'll do my best to answer what you've got. Thanks.